The ink on the contract wasn't even dry when Geneva realized the suitcase by the door wasn't for a vacation. It was for her exile. In the quiet, desperate town of Oakhaven, blood didn't run thicker than water. It ran thinner than the ink on a check. Her own sisters, Beatrice and Charlotte, stood there with cold smiles, watching their father trade Geneva's life to clear a gambling debt with the notorious Holt pack. They thought they were disposing of the family burden, selling the runt to a rival renowned for brutality. They didn't know they were handing her directly to the one man the entire werewolf kingdom feared, and the only man who had been searching for her for a century. They didn't just sell a sister. They accidentally sold the Alpha King his queen. The rain in Oakhaven didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime stick to the pavement. Geneva Miller sat at the scarred oak table in her father's kitchen, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood to stop her hands from trembling. The house smelled of stale beer and expensive, cloying perfume, the signature scent of her older sisters, Beatrice and Charlotte. "Stop fidgeting. Jen, you look guilty," Beatrice said, applying a fresh coat of crimson lipstick in the hallway mirror. She didn't look at Geneva. She never really looked at her. Only through her. "I haven't done anything," Geneva whispered, her voice cracking. "Why is my bag packed? Where is Dad sending me?" Frank Miller entered the room, avoiding his youngest daughter's gaze. He was a man hollowed out by bad bets and worse whiskey. He held a thick envelope in one hand and a glass in the other. He looked at Beatrice, then at Charlotte, who was leaning against the doorframe scrolling on her phone, looking bored. "It's a job, Jen," Frank muttered, taking a swig. "Just a domestic position. High wages. It'll help the family. You want to help the family, don't you? After everything we've done for you." Geneva felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Since her mother died, she had been the maid, the cook, and the punching bag for the Miller household. She was 22, but she felt 50. She had never shifted a late bloomer. They called her a defect, her sisters whispered. "Where?" Geneva asked, standing up. "Who is the employer?" Charlotte looked up from her phone, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "The Holts, over in Black Ridge." Geneva's blood ran cold. The Holt pack wasn't just a rival. They were essentially a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of a werewolf pack. Their alpha, Kieran Holt, was known for running underground fighting rings and treating Omegas like disposable commodities. "No," Geneva breathed. "Dad, you can't. Kieran Holt kills people like me. He trades women. He bought your debt." "Frank, didn't he?" Beatrice said sharply, turning from the mirror. She walked over and placed a manicured hand on her father's shoulder. "Think about the house. Dad, think about our standing. If you don't pay Holt, he comes for all of us. Jen is the only asset we have left." Asset. The word hung in the air like smoke. "I'm your daughter," Geneva pleaded, tears spilling over. She looked at Frank, begging for a flicker of paternal instinct. "Dad, please." Frank's face twisted in shame, but he slammed the glass down. "It's done. Geneva, they're coming in 10 minutes. You go with them. You work off the debt. And maybe in a few years, you come back." "She won't come back." Charlotte laughed softly, finally pocketing her phone. "Don't give her false hope. It's cruel." The headlights of a black SUV swept across the kitchen window, blinding them for a second. The engine growled a low, mechanical threat that vibrated the floorboards. "They're here," Beatrice said, grabbing the handle of Geneva's worn suitcase. She shoved it into Geneva's chest. "Don't make a scene. If you fight, they'll just hurt Dad." "Do you want that on your conscience?" That was the master stroke. They knew Geneva's weakness was her loyalty to a family that didn't deserve it. She gripped the handle of the suitcase, her knuckles white. She looked at her sister's beautiful, polished, and rotten to the core. She looked at her father, who had turned his back to pour another drink. "I will never forgive you for this," Geneva said, her voice surprisingly steady. "When the moon judges us, remember this moment. Save the drama for the kennel." Charlotte sneered, opening the front door. Two men in dark suits waited in the rain. They didn't look like diplomats. They looked like executioners. Geneva stepped out into the downpour, the water instantly soaking her thin sweater. As she was roughly guided toward the car, she looked back. Beatrice and Charlotte were watching from the window, safe and dry. They weren't mourning her departure. They were already celebrating the space she left behind. The drive was silent and lasted for 3 hours. Geneva sat in the back, squeezed between the door and a large man who smelled of tobacco and dried blood. They had taken her phone. She had no idea where they were. But the terrain had changed from the suburban sprawl of Oak Haven to the dense, winding forestry of the Northern Territories. The car suddenly slowed, turning off the main highway onto a gravel logging road. "Why are we stopping?" Geneva asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Black Ridge is another hour north." "Change of plans," the driver grunted. "Alpha Holt is meeting a buyer here. Needs the merchandise transferred." Merchandise. Geneva felt bile rise in her throat. She wasn't going to be a maid. She wasn't even going to be a debt slave in the pack house. She was being sold to a third party before she even arrived. The SUV pulled into a clearing, illuminated by the headlights of another vehicle, a sleek, matte black sedan that looked out of place in the mud. It was expensive. Custom. The driver hauled Geneva out of the car. The rain had turned to a freezing mist. Across the clearing, a man leaned against the hood of the black sedan. He was tall, wearing a long charcoal coat, his face obscured by the shadows of the trees. He didn't look like a Holt enforcer. He looked regal and dangerous. "Is this her?" the man asked. His voice was a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the ground. "Yeah, the Miller girl. Runt. Can't shift. But she's pretty enough," the Holt driver said, shoving Geneva forward. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the mud. The stranger pushed off the car and walked toward her. He moved with a predatory grace, silent and fluid. As he stepped into the light of the headlamps, Geneva looked up. He was striking. High cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that were a startling, luminous gold. Not the yellow of a normal wolf, but the gold of molten metal. He looked at her, and for a second, his expression faltered. A flash of shock, quickly buried behind a mask of indifference. "She's hurt," the stranger observed, looking at the scrape on her knee. "She's fine," the driver spat. "Holt wants the 50 grand. Cash." The stranger didn't look at the driver. He kept his eyes locked on Geneva. He extended a hand, encased in a black leather glove. "Stand up, Geneva." She froze. "How do you know my name?" "Stand up," he repeated. Softer this time. She took his hand. He pulled her up with effortless strength. The moment her skin touched the leather of his glove, a shock wave rattled through her body. It wasn't static electricity. It was a pull, a magnetic snap deep in her marrow. She gasped. The stranger's eyes narrowed. He felt it too. "Money's in the bag," the stranger said, gesturing vaguely to the ground near his car. The Holt driver laughed. "You think you can just toss a bag and leave? Alpha Holt wants to meet you. He wants to know who's buying up all the strays in the territory." "I have no interest in meeting Kieran Holt," the stranger said dismissively. "Take the money and leave." The driver signaled to his partner. "Grab her back. We're renegotiating." The partner lunged for Geneva. The explosion of violence was so fast, Geneva barely processed it. The stranger didn't shift. He didn't even drop his cool demeanor. He simply moved. He sidestepped the partner's tackle, grabbed the man's arm, and with a sickening crunch, snapped the bone. The driver growled, his eyes flashing red as he began to shift, his face elongating into a snout. The stranger turned. He let out a low, thunderous growl, a sound so primal and authoritative that the Holt driver froze mid-shift. It was an alpha command, but amplified. "Leave," the stranger commanded. The single word hit the clearing like a physical blow. The Holt thugs, terrified by the sheer aura of power radiating from this man, scrambled back. They dragged their injured companion into the SUV and peeled away, mud spraying everywhere, leaving the money bag untouched in the dirt. Silence returned to the clearing. Geneva stood shivering, covered in mud, staring at the man who had just dismantled 2 enforcers without breaking a sweat. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm and smelled of cedar, rain, and something ancient. "I'm Royce," he said. He didn't offer a last name. He looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak again. "And your father and sisters made a grave mistake tonight. Geneva, you bought me?" she asked, fear creeping back in. Royce let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I didn't buy you. Little wolf, I intercepted the sale. There is a difference." He opened the passenger door of the black sedan. "Where are we going?" she asked, hesitating. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere the Holts can't reach you." He paused, his golden eyes softening slightly. "You're freezing. Get in the car." Geneva looked back at the dark road leading to Oakhaven, then at the man offering her warmth. She realized she had no home to return to. She slid into the leather seat. As Royce walked around to the driver's side, he pulled out his phone. He sent a single text message. "I found her. Prepare the guard." He got in, started the engine, and for the first time in her life, Geneva felt the distinct, terrifying sensation that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She just didn't know that the man driving the car wasn't a mercenary or a wealthy rogue. He was Royce D'Angelo, the Alpha King. And he had just found the one thing he had been missing for 300 years. Royce drove through the night, the silence in the car heavy but not uncomfortable. Geneva huddled in his coat, the heater blasting, watching the world blur by. She noticed he wasn't taking the highway. He was taking back roads, intricate turns that only a local or a strategist would know. "You're not from around here," Geneva said quietly. It wasn't a question. Royce glanced at her. "What makes you say that? You drive like you own the road, but you're checking the GPS every 10 minutes. And you don't smell like Oakhaven. Oakhaven smells like despair. You smell like—" She stopped, blushing. "Like what?" Royce pressed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Like a storm," she admitted. They pulled up to a structure that defied the definition of a safe house. It was a modern architectural marvel of glass and steel hidden deep within a valley, surrounded by dense pines. It looked like a fortress disguised as a luxury retreat. "This is yours." Geneva gaped as the heavy iron gates swung open automatically. "It's one of them," Royce said. He pulled into the garage. "We'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow. We move to the capital?" "The capital." Geneva scrambled out of the car as he cut the engine. "Wait. You mean the royal territory? I can't go there. I'm an undocumented wolf. I don't have a pack anymore. The King's Guard will arrest me." Royce walked around the car and stood in front of her. He was tall, looming over her, but he made himself small, lowering his head to catch her eyes. "The King's Guard won't touch you," Royce said firmly. "How do you know you're just wealthy? You're not them." Royce didn't answer. He led her inside. The interior was minimalist, cold, but immaculate. "There's food in the kitchen, a shower in the hall, clothes in the guest room. They might be a bit big, but they're clean." Geneva went to the shower, needing to wash the feeling of her father's betrayal off her skin. As the hot water hit her, she cried. She cried for the mother she lost, the childhood she never had, and the family that had sold her for a gambling debt. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush robe that swallowed her small frame, she found Royce in the living room. He was on the phone, his back to her. His voice was different now, colder, sharper. "I want the Miller family watched," Royce was saying. "Don't touch them yet. If they try to leave Oakhaven, detain them and find out everything about Kieran Holt's operations. If he thinks he can traffic mates in my kingdom, I will burn his pack to the ground." Mate's Geneva froze. She stepped on a loose floorboard, and it creaked. Royce spun around instantly, ending the call. His expression softened when he saw her. "You heard that," he said. "Who are you really, Royce?" Geneva asked, stepping into the room. "You command people like soldiers. You talk about the kingdom like it's your backyard, and at the clearing, I felt something." Royce sighed. He walked over to a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Drink. It'll help the shock." She took it but didn't drink. "Answer me." "The bond," Royce said quietly. "You felt the bond." Geneva's breath hitched. "That's impossible. I'm a defect. I can't shift. I don't get a fated mate. My sisters said—" "Your sisters are liars," Royce growled, the anger flaring in his eyes again. "You are not a defect. Geneva, you are a late bloomer because your bloodline is ancient. It takes time for that kind of power to manifest." He took a step closer. The air between them crackled. "As for who I am," Royce said, reaching up to undo the top button of his shirt. He pulled the collar aside to reveal a mark branded into the skin over his collarbone. It wasn't a pack mark. It was a crest, a wolf with a crown of thorns. Geneva gasped, the glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. She dropped to her knees, not out of clumsiness, but out of instinct. "The Valerius crest," she whispered. You're the king." "I am," Royce said. He knelt down, ignoring the shattered glass, and took her hands. "And you, Geneva Miller, are the woman I have waited 300 years to find. You are my mate." Geneva looked at him, panic warring with awe. "This is a mistake. I'm nobody. My father sold me for $50,000. I'm not a queen." "You are what I say you are," Royce said fiercely, "and I say you are mine." Suddenly, the security alarms of the house blared a piercing, red light emergency. Royce stood up instantly, pulling Geneva behind him. His eyes shifted fully to gold. "Halt!" Royce snarled. "He tracked the car!" "He followed us," Geneva cried. "No," Royce said, moving toward the weapon cabinet concealed in the wall. "He didn't follow. Someone betrayed my location. We have a leak in the guard." He tossed Geneva a heavy, silver handgun. "Do you know how to use this?" "No, point and pull," Royce said, grabbing a sword, an actual, gleaming steel sword from the wall. "Stay behind me, tonight. You see why they call me the Butcher of the North." The front glass wall shattered as a wolf the size of a bear crashed through. Snarling. It wasn't Kieran Holt, it was a mercenary. And behind him, a dozen more pairs of glowing eyes emerged from the tree line. Royce didn't flinch. He looked at Geneva. "Do not leave this room," he charged. The living room of the safe house turned into a slaughterhouse within seconds. Royce didn't fight like a man. He fought like a force of nature, with the sword in one hand and his shifting claws on the other. He moved through the mercenaries with terrifying efficiency. He was a blur of violence, dismantling the intruders before they could even cross the threshold fully. Geneva huddled behind the heavy oak bar, the silver gun heavy and cold in her sweating palms. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every crash, every wet thud of a body hitting the floor made her flinch. "Get the girl," a voice roared from the broken window. Two wolves, sleeker and faster than the others, bypassed Royce, who was engaged with 3 heavy-set attackers near the fireplace. They scrambled over the furniture, their eyes locked on Geneva. She stood up, her hands shaking, and leveled the gun. "Stay back!" The first wolf lunged. She pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly dislocated her shoulder, and the bullet went wide, shattering a vase. The wolf landed on her, its weight crushing the air from her lungs. The gun skittered across the floor, out of reach. Hot, rancid breath washed over her face. Snapping jaws inches from her throat, Geneva screamed, scrabbling at the wolf's thick fur, trying to push the beast away. "Royce!" she shrieked. Royce heard her. He roared a sound of pure, unadulterated rage that shook the glass walls. He turned, decapitating an enemy with a backhand swing, and launched himself toward her. But he was too far away. The second wolf was already circling, ready to snap at her legs. Geneva looked into the yellow eyes of the wolf on top of her. She saw death, and in that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear that had ruled her life, fear of her sisters, fear of her father, fear of being the runt, evaporated, replaced by a white-hot fury. She was the mate of the king. She was not prey. A burning heat exploded in her chest, radiating outward like a supernova. Her vision tinted red, then shifted to a blinding, ethereal violet. "Get off!" she screamed. It wasn't just a scream. It was a pulse of raw kinetic energy. A shock wave erupted from her body. The wolf on top of her didn't just let go. It was blasted backward as if hit by a cannonball, smashing through the kitchen island with a sickening crunch of bone. The second wolf froze, whining, its ears pinned back flat against its skull. It wasn't looking at Royce. It was looking at Geneva. Geneva sat up, gasping. She looked at her hands. They weren't shifting into claws, but they were glowing with a faint, violet luminescence. She looked up, her eyes wide. The room went silent. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their packmate launched across the room by a girl who supposedly couldn't shift, faltered. That hesitation cost them their lives. Royce finished them in seconds, his movements brutal and final. He stood amidst the wreckage, chest heaving, blood that wasn't his soaking his white shirt. He dropped the sword and rushed to her, falling to his knees. "Geneva," he breathed, reaching for her face. His gloves were stained, so he hesitated, not wanting to touch her with the violence he carried. I did something, she whispered, looking at the unconscious wolf embedded in the cabinetry. I didn't shift, Royce. I just pushed. Royce pulled his glove off with his teeth and cupped her cheek. His golden eyes searched hers. Violet, he murmured, awe coloring his voice. You have the witch-wolf bloodline. It hasn't been seen since the First Era. You aren't a runt, Geneva. You're a conduit. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. We have to go. Now. Holt knows we're here, and he knows what you are. The price on your head just quadrupled. Where? She asked, clinging to him. The capital, Royce said, standing and pulling her up. I'm done hiding. It's time to introduce the world to its queen. The royal capital was a city of steel and glass, built into the side of a massive mountain range, inaccessible to humans and fortified against rogue packs. The palace sat at the peak, a sprawling estate that made the Oakhaven mansions look like dollhouses. Geneva walked through the marble halls, feeling smaller than she ever had in her father's kitchen. She was wearing borrowed tactical gear, smelling of smoke and dried blood. Servants in crisp uniforms bowed as Royce strode past them, but their eyes lingered on her confused, judgmental. Who is the stray their eyes seemed to ask? Royce led her to the royal wing, bypassing the council chambers where shouting men were demanding answers about the safe house attack. Prepare the Queen's suite, Royce barked at the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable. And get a healer, now. I'm fine, Royce, Geneva said, though her adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. You're not fine. You barely survived, he said, ushering her into a room that was larger than her entire childhood home. It had a balcony overlooking the city, a bed the size of a boat, and a walk-in closet filled with silks and velvets. I don't belong here, Geneva whispered as the door closed, leaving them alone. She caught her reflection in a gilded mirror. Mud in her hair, bruises on her neck. Look at me. I'm a mess. My sisters were right. I'm nothing. Royce grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. Stop it. Your sisters are parasites. You just blasted a fully shifted warrior through a granite counter without lifting a finger. You are powerful. Geneva. And you are mine. He kissed her then, a desperate, searing kiss that tasted of danger and promise. For a moment, the politics and the danger faded. There was only him. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Oakhaven, the reality of the Miller family's choices was beginning to set in. Beatrice and Charlotte were sitting in a high-end boutique in the city centre, surrounded by shopping bags. They had taken the $50,000 left in the driveway, the money Royce had told the Holt thugs to leave, and they were spending it like water. This cashmere is divine, Charlotte said, draping a scarf over her neck. I told you. Getting rid of the dead weight was the best thing we ever did. Dad's been quiet, but he'll get over it once we renovate the kitchen. I heard the Holts are vicious, though, Beatrice said, checking her reflection. You don't think they'll hurt her? Charlotte laughed. Who cares she's a maid now, or whatever Omegas do? She's probably scrubbing floors. Better her than us. Suddenly, the boutique door chimed, but it wasn't a customer. Two men walked in. They wore leather jackets with the Holt insignia, a jagged claw stitched onto the lapels. The shop assistant went pale and backed away. Beatrice and Charlotte Miller, the taller man asked. Yes, Charlotte smiled flirtatiously. Can we help you, boys?" "Alpha Holt sends his regards," the man said, locking the front door. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. We didn't get the girl." Beatrice dropped her credit card. "What she left with your men 2 nights ago." "Our men never came back," the man said, his voice dropping to a growl. "And the girl is gone, which means you sold us a product you didn't deliver. And you spent the refund." He looked at the piles of shopping bags. We found that money," Charlotte stammered, stepping back. "Alpha Holt is very upset," the man said, grabbing Charlotte by the arm. "He wants his money, or he wants a replacement." Beatrice screamed as the second man grabbed her. They weren't being driven to a job. They were being dragged out of the store in broad daylight, kicking and screaming, tossed into the back of a van. The irony was lost on them. They had sold their sister to clear a debt, only to inherit her fate. 2 days later, the atmosphere at the royal court had shifted from celebration to a razor-sharp tension. The king was leaving again, and this time he wasn't going on a diplomatic mission. He was going to war. Geneva stood on the tarmac of the private royal airfield, the biting wind whipping strands of hair across her face. She looked nothing like the terrified girl who had been shoved into the back of a sedan just nights ago. The royal healers had erased the bruises from her skin, and the palace tailors had replaced her threadbare sweaters with armor disguised as fashion. She wore a tailored black trench coat that cinched at her waist, reinforced combat boots, and her hair was braided back tightly with silver thread, exposing the determined line of her jaw. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like the Queen Royce insisted she was. "Are you ready?" Royce asked, his voice low as he checked the magazine of his high-caliber pistol. He slid the weapon into his shoulder holster, his movements precise and practiced. He wasn't wearing his crown today. He was wearing tactical gear, the alpha predator preparing to defend his mate. "Why are we going back?" Geneva asked, her voice barely audible over the whine of the helicopter engines. "You said we were safe here. You said the palace was impenetrable." "We are safe." "They are not," Royce said grimly. "Kieran Holt sent a message an hour ago. He has your family. He's holding them hostage at your father's house in Oakhaven. He wants to trade them for you." Geneva felt a cold, sharp pang in her chest. It wasn't fear, that familiar, suffocating blanket she had worn for years was gone. This was something else. It was the icy burn of indignation. "He wants to trade my abusers for me," she asked, disbelief coloring her tone. "He thinks I'll trade my freedom for the people who sold it." "I told him no," Royce said, stepping closer to shield her from the wind. "But he threatened to burn Oakhaven to the ground. He's desperate. Geneva. He knows he's lost the political game. So he's flipping the board. Innocent people, your neighbors. The townspeople will die if we don't end this. Kieran has gone rogue. He's challenging the crown." "Then let's end it," Geneva said. Her eyes flashed with that strange, beautiful violet hue, the witch blood responding to her resolve. They boarded the helicopter, the machine lifting off and cutting the travel time from hours to mere minutes, as the landscape shifted from the majestic peaks of the royal territory to the dreary, grey sprawl of Oakhaven. Geneva looked out the window. From this height, the town that had been her entire world, her prison, looked insignificant. It was just a cluster of sad buildings amidst the trees. They landed on the high school football field, the rotor wash flattening the grass. A panic rippled through the onlookers as a convoy of black Royal Guard SUVs surged onto the field to meet them. The drive to the Miller house was surreal. Geneva watched the familiar streets roll by through tinted, bulletproof glass. There was the bakery where she wasn't allowed to buy sweets because the money was needed for Beatrice's dance lessons. There was the park where she used to hide in the drainage pipe to read library books in peace. Now, she was rolling through these streets in a motorcade, an army at her back. They pulled up to the Miller residence. The suburban facade was shattered. The front door had been kicked in, hanging off its hinges. The windows were smashed, jagged teeth of glass reflecting the grey sky. Royce got out first, his presence commanding. The Royal Guard fanned out instantly, securing the perimeter with silent efficiency. He extended a hand to Geneva. "Stay close," he commanded softly. "And remember who you are." They walked up the path, stepping over the debris of her father's flower pots. Inside, the house smelled of stale beer, fear, and the musk of aggressive wolves. The living room, once the site of her family's callous betrayal, was a wreck. Furniture was overturned. The drywall was punched through. Frank Miller was tied to a dining chair in the center of the room, his face beaten and bloody, his head hanging low. Beatrice and Charlotte were huddled in the corner near the fireplace, sobbing. Their expensive clothes, likely bought with the down payment for Geneva, were torn and dirty. Mascara ran down their cheeks in black streaks. Standing in the center of the room, vibrating with manic energy, was Kieran Holt. He was massive, scarred, and radiated a foul, corrupt power. He held a long, serrated hunting knife, idly cleaning his fingernails with the tip. Finally, Kieran sneered, looking up as Royce and Geneva entered. The king descends from his high tower. His eyes shifted to Geneva, hungry and cruel. "And look at the runt. You cleaned up nice. Sweetheart, though I must say, I preferred you in the mud. It suited your station. Let them go." "Kieran," Royce said calmly. He didn't draw his weapon. He stood with his hands at his sides, projecting absolute confidence. "This ends now. Surrender, and I'll grant you a quick death. Continue this, and I will make it slow." Kieran laughed, a barking, jagged sound. "Surrender. You think you're in charge here. I have the leverage. I have her family." He moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Charlotte by her hair and yanking her head back. The blade of the knife pressed against her throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Charlotte shrieked, her eyes wild with terror as she locked onto Geneva. "Jen!" Charlotte screamed, the name tearing from her throat. "Jen, please tell him we're your sisters. Save us. Do something." Geneva stepped forward, leaving the protective circle of Royce's aura. The room went quiet. She looked at Charlotte, trembling and pathetic. She looked at Beatrice, who was hyperventilating on the floor. She looked at her father, who couldn't even meet her gaze. She waited for the old fear to return. She waited for the instinct to appease them, to fix their mess, to take the burden. But it didn't come. "Sisters?" Geneva asked, her voice cool and steady, cutting through the tension like a razor. "Sisters protect each other. Charlotte. Sisters don't pack your bags while you cry. Sisters don't stand by the window and watch as you are sold to a monster to clear a gambling debt." Frank Miller looked up then, shame burning his face a deep crimson. "Geneva, I had no choice. The debt." "You always had a choice, Dad," she said, her voice tinged with a profound sadness. "You chose the bottle. You chose the gambling. And when the bill came due, you chose them. You never chose me." "Enough of this soap opera," Kieran roared, pressing the knife harder against Charlotte's skin. "Come here, girl, and submit. or I cut her throat right now. If you touch her, Royce warned, his voice dropping an octave into a guttural growl that shook the floorboards. I will peel the skin from your bones while you are still breathing. She's my property, Kieran yelled, spit flying from his mouth. I paid for her. The contract is valid. You paid for a slave, Royce said, stepping aside to reveal Geneva fully to the room. You didn't pay for the Queen. Geneva raised her hand. She didn't need a gun. She felt the energy welling up inside her, a reservoir of ancient power that had been dammed up for 22 years. The violet light pooled in her palms, swirling like a nebula. She focused her intent on the object in Kieran's hand. I am not your property, Geneva said. She thrust her hand forward, a blast of kinetic violet energy, focused and sharp as a lance, shot across the room. It didn't hit Kieran, it hit the steel of the hunting knife. The metal didn't just break, it shattered. It disintegrated into dust and shrapnel with a high-pitched ring. Kieran recoiled, dropping the handle, staring at his empty hand in shock. Beatrice and Charlotte gasped, staring at their runt sister with wide, terrified eyes. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The dynamic had shifted forever. They hadn't just sold their sister, they had sold a monster. And now, she had come back. Kill them! Kieran screamed to the shadows of the kitchen. Kill them all. Guard! Royce commanded. The kitchen door exploded inward as the royal guard breached the back of the house. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Royce launched himself at Kieran, shifting mid-air. The two alphas collided with the force of a freight train, crashing through the drywall into the hallway in a blur of fur and claws. Geneva didn't move. A Holt enforcer, desperate and cornered, charged her from the stairs, shifting into his wolf form. He was massive, teeth bared, intending to rip her throat out. Geneva simply looked at him. Her eyes were fully glowing now. Two violet suns. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She exerted her will upon the space around her. Sit, she commanded. The word wasn't spoken. It was detonated. The wolf command, amplified by her witch blood, hit the enforcer like a mystical hammer. The wolf's momentum was arrested instantly. He slammed into the floor, sliding to her feet, whining in confusion and pain as his own body betrayed him. He dropped to his belly, ears pinned back, unable to disobey the absolute authority in her voice. The fight was over in minutes. The Royal Guard was elite, and Royce was a demon in combat. Kieran Holt lay unconscious and bleeding in the hallway, Royce's boot pressed firmly against his throat. Silence fell over the ruined house, broken only by the whimpering of the Miller sisters. Geneva walked over to the corner where her family was huddled. They flinched as she approached, terrifyingly aware that the girl they had abused held their lives in her glowing hands. "Jenna," Beatrice whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand. We didn't know. We're sorry. Please. Jen, we're family. Blood is thicker than water." Geneva looked down at them. She looked at the expensive silk scarf Charlotte was still wearing, a purchase made with the blood money. "Untie them," Geneva said to a guard. The guard sliced their bonds. Beatrice and Charlotte stood up, stumbling, reaching for Geneva to hug her, to cry on her shoulder, to curry favor with the Queen. Geneva took a sharp step back. "Don't touch me." "Jen," Frank croaked from his chair, rubbing his raw wrists. "You came back for us. You saved us." "I came back for him," Geneva said, pointing at the unconscious form of Kieran. "To make sure he never hurts anyone again, and to make sure this town is safe." She turned to Royce, who had returned to her side, wiping blood from his lip. He looked at her with intense pride, a silent acknowledgement of her power. "What do we do with them?" Royce asked, gesturing to the Millers with disdain. "They conspired to traffic a royal mate. The punishment is death." The sisters screamed, clutching each other. Frank turned pale. Geneva looked at her family one last time. She saw them for what they were: small, greedy, fearful people. They weren't monsters worthy of execution. They were parasites. "They wanted the money, didn't they?" Geneva said softly. "They wanted to be free of me." She turned toward the door, the cold air rushing in to cleanse the house. "Let them keep the house. Let them keep their lives. But they are banished from the capital and the northern territories. And if they ever try to contact me, or use my name to get a loan, or claim relation to the crown, arrest them." "Geneva!" Charlotte screamed, running to the doorway but stopped by a guard's arm. "You can't leave us here. We have nothing. The money is gone. We spent it." Geneva paused at the threshold. She looked back over her shoulder, her silhouette framed by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers outside. "You have each other," she said, her voice devoid of malice, simply stating a fact. "That's what you always wanted, isn't it? Just the three of you." She walked out into the cool night air. Royce at her side, leaving her sisters screaming her name in the wreckage of the life they had tried to buy with her blood. She didn't look back. 3 weeks had passed since the raid on Oakhaven, and the world had turned white. The first heavy snow of the season had descended upon the royal capital, blanketing the slate-grey roofs of the palace and silencing the bustling streets below. From the high windows of the royal wing, the world looked pristine, untouched, and deceptively peaceful. It was a stark, almost blinding contrast to the mud, rain, and grime Geneva had left behind, a life that now felt less like a memory and more like a fever dream she had finally woken from. Tonight, the silence would be broken. The grand hall was filled to capacity, a sea of silk and ambition. Every alpha from the 12 territories had gathered, their entourages in tow. They weren't there just to celebrate the winter solstice. They were there to witness the impossible. The rumors had spread through the kingdom like wildfire, whispered in boardrooms and shouted in training yards. The king had found his mate, and she wasn't just a wolf. She was something the history books had buried. Geneva stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her private chambers. The dress she wore was a masterpiece of intimidation and beauty a deep. Midnight blue velvet that shimmered like the night sky, tailored to cling to her frame before cascading into a pool of darkness at her feet. It was backless, a deliberate choice. The low cut revealed the faint, glowing violet markings that had etched themselves across her skin since her awakening. They were the ancient runes of the witch-wolf lineage, a map of power that pulsated softly with the rhythm of her heartbeat. She stared at her reflection, tracing the line of her jaw. The bruises were gone. The fear was gone. But something else had taken its place. "You're shaking," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Geneva didn't turn. She watched Royce in the reflection as he walked up behind her. He was breathtaking, dressed in formal military regalia, the charcoal fabric spanning his broad shoulders, pinned with medals from wars fought centuries ago. He moved with the quiet lethality of a predator, stopping just behind her. "I'm not shaking because I'm scared," Geneva said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She placed her hand over his as he rested it possessively on her waist. The heat of his skin burned through the velvet. "I'm shaking because I'm angry," Royce frowned, his golden eyes darkening with concern. He leaned down, brushing his lips against the sensitive skin behind her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. Angry why? Mea Luna Kieran is in the deepest dungeon beneath the mountain, rotting in the dark. Your family is exiled, penniless and powerless. You have won, little wolf. The board is cleared. I'm angry that I let them make me feel small for so long, she whispered, her eyes flashing with that strange, ethereal violet hue. I look at this woman in the mirror, this queen, and I don't recognize her. She's strong. She's dangerous. She has magic in her veins. But for 22 years, I let Beatrice and Charlotte convince me I was waste. I let my father sell me like cattle. I'm mourning the time I lost believing their lies. Royce spun her around, forcing her to look away from the mirror and into his fierce gaze. His hands gripped her waist tight, grounding her. That girl in Oakhaven had to survive, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She was strong in a different way. She endured. If you hadn't endured the rain, you wouldn't be here to weather the storm. You wouldn't be her. He reached past her to the velvet box resting on the vanity table. He flipped the lid open. Inside sat the crown of the North. It wasn't the delicate, jeweled tiara of a fairy tale princess. It was heavy, forged from dark, ancient iron and woven with raw, uncut diamonds that looked like shards of ice. It was a crown meant for war as much as for ruling. "Are you ready to take your place?" Royce asked, lifting the crown. "Once you walk out those doors, there is no going back to the shadows. You belong to the kingdom now, and they belong to you." Geneva took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of cedar and snow. She thought of the cold rain in Oakhaven. She thought of the look on Charlotte's face when the money ran out. She thought of the stranger who had offered her a hand in the mud and changed the trajectory of the universe. "Put it on me," she said. Royce lowered the heavy crown onto her head. It settled with a weight that felt right, as if her spine had been waiting for this specific burden. They walked out of the suite and down the long, tapestried corridor to the great double doors of the ballroom. The royal guard, lined up in 2 perfect rows, bowed low as they passed. The guards threw the heavy oak doors open, and the sound of the orchestra spilled out. As soon as they stepped into the frame, the noise of the crowd died instantly. 1,000 eyes turned toward the top of the grand staircase. The silence was absolute, heavy with judgment and awe. "Announcing!" the royal herald bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted, frescoed ceiling. His Majesty, King Royce Valerius, and Her Majesty, the Witch Queen, Geneva Valerius. A collective gasp rippled through the room at the title Witch Queen. It wasn't just a name, it was a declaration of dominance. It was a warning to anyone who dared to think she was merely a figurehead or a trophy. As they began their descent down the marble staircase, Geneva saw the faces she recognized from the news, powerful alphas, wealthy business tycoons, ancient matriarchs who had ruled society for decades. They all bowed. They lowered their eyes in submission. But amidst the sea of respectful faces, Geneva felt a sudden tug in her chest. Her magic flared, unbidden. The violet runes on her back heated up, and for a split second, the ballroom dissolved. In her mind's eye, a vision washed over her, visceral and real. She was no longer in the warm, golden light of the palace. She was in a cramped, grease-stained diner in a rundown city south of the border. She smelled stale frying oil and bleach. She saw Beatrice, her hair frizzy and unkempt, wearing a stained apron, Her sister was scrubbing dishes in a sink full of grey water, her hands red and chapped, flinching as a manager shouted at her to move faster. The vision shifted. She saw a pawn shop with barred windows. Charlotte stood at the counter, looking haggard, her once pristine skin sallow. She was trying to sell a fake designer bag, one she had bought with the money from Geneva's sale. The broker laughed in her face, tossing the bag back. Charlotte didn't scream. She just looked down, defeated, clutching a coat that was too thin for the winter. They were alive, but they were living the life they had tried to condemn Geneva to. The karmic balance had settled with terrifying precision. Geneva blinked, and the grease and despair vanished. She was back in the ballroom, her hand in Royce's, the scent of expensive perfume and champagne replacing the smell of poverty. "What did you see?" Royce asked softly as they reached the center of the dance floor. "Your eyes." They drifted. Geneva looked up at him, the monster who had saved her, the king who worshipped her. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, one that reached her eyes and made them sparkle brighter than the diamonds on her head. "I saw the past," she said, her voice light, unburdened. "And I saw it fading away." The orchestra swelled, the strings filling the air with a haunting, beautiful waltz. Royce placed his hand on the small of her back, his touch electric. "And the future?" Royce asked, spinning her expertly. Geneva felt the hum of magic in her veins, the strength of the pack surrounding them, and the undeniable bond that tethered her soul to the man holding her. "The future," she said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart, "is entirely ours." As they danced, the court watched in awe. They weren't just watching a king and queen. They were watching the beginning of a new dynasty, a reign of gold and violet, of wolf and witch. The runt of Oakhaven was gone, buried in the mud of her past. Long live the queen. And that is the story of how Geneva Miller went from being sold for a gambling debt to ruling the entire werewolf kingdom. It's a brutal reminder that your value isn't defined by how others treat you, especially not toxic family members who only see you as a commodity. Beatrice and Charlotte thought they were selling a burden, but they were actually setting Geneva free to find her true destiny. In the end, they got exactly what they deserved, a life of mediocrity, while the sister they tormented ascended to a throne they couldn't even dream of touching. It proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't violence, it's just living better than your enemies ever could. I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of Royce. Betrayal and justice. If you felt satisfied seeing the sisters get what was coming to them, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. What would you have done in Geneva's place? Would you have banished your family like she did? Or would you have taken a darker revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our werewolf Royce saga. I'll see you in the next story.